Thank you for tuning in to Blue Dog Radio. This is your host, the WAG. I just read a very sad story about something that just happened in Greece. Well, a retired pharmacist is so depressed and so deprived by having his pensions cut by a state desperate for money that he committed suicide in a public place because he wanted everyone to see it and he wanted to get his message out. Fortunately, America is not that bad off yet, but it could be. We're over $15 trillion in debt, and 42% of all government spending is deficit spending. So 42% of what the government spends is being added onto that total debt. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. How do we fix our budget? The Tea Party likes to say we have a spending problem, not a revenue problem. Well, we have both. The Tea Party is only half right, and focusing on half the solution is not going to get us there. Here's what we really need to do. First of all, Congress is not going to balance the budget unless we make them balance the budget. So the first thing we need to do is bind them with the Constitution. We need a balanced budget amendment. It'll probably have to be proposed by the states. The balanced budget amendment should give them 5 years at first to balance the budget. It'll say within 5 years of ratification of this amendment, Congress must balance the budget. Thereafter, they must balance the budget every year unless there is a declaration of war or Congress votes by 2/3 of both chambers to temporarily allow deficit spending. Some of you are going to say, well, they can't get 2/3 for anything. Good. If they can't get 2/3, they can't spend money they don't have, so great. Next thing we need to do is reinstitute pay-as-you-go spending with no exceptions. Obama talked about implementing it, but he said except for defense spending. He sounds like a dang neocon Republican. Don't make an exception for defense spending. We need to do this with everything. So now that we got that in place, we've got an actual framework to constrain them and force them to work towards a balanced budget. Here's what we do next. Let's fix our revenue problem first, because that way we'll know how much money we're actually working with. And we do this through tax reform. We don't need actual tax hikes. Ronald Reagan was able to cut the marginal tax rate and generate more revenue. You might say that sounds counterintuitive. Yeah, it is counterintuitive, but here's the thing. When we had a tax rate of 50%, most people didn't pay 50%. Very, very few, if anyone, paid 50% because there were so many exemptions, so many loopholes, not to mention tax fraud. When he cut it to 28%, a lot more people actually paid 28%. And furthermore, he raised the so-called capital gains tax, which is pretty much the Wall Street tax. He raised that to 28% so that Wall Street had to pay their fair share. Right now, the capital gains is only 15%, so let's raise it to 28%, just like Ronald Reagan did, and let's cut the marginal tax rate to 28% and cut out most exemptions. You won't be able to write as much stuff off anymore, but you'll also have a lower tax rate, so it'll work out great for us. It'll lower the administrative costs, and it'll generate more revenue. So once we have got that under control, and I'm of the view that tax reform should fix about 25% of the problem. That's what most economists argue also. The other 75% needs to come from spending cuts. So the next thing we do, just to get the ball rolling, let's take every single department in government except for Veterans Affairs and cut 5% right off the top. As for Veterans Affairs, if you want to save money on Veterans Affairs, stop blowing things up. No more wars in Iraq, no more wars in Afghanistan. Stop sending people to fight, and we won't have as many veterans to take care of. But we sent those people to fight. We sent them to get their heads all screwed up fighting pointless wars that they don't know what the heck they're doing over there. We need to take care of them. Next, we go through each department individually and decide which ones will be cut further. So this way, every department except veterans gets cut by 5% no matter what, and some departments get cut by more. I definitely think we need to target the Department of Defense because it's almost $700 billion this year, and that's cut because it was actually higher last year. It was like $760 billion. The Department of Defense is the largest portion of our government's spending other than Social Security, but Social Security is paid for by a Social Security tax, whereas defense is not. So we make cuts into individual departments further and further until we eventually get to that point where we have balanced the budget. Thereafter, we need to focus on chipping away at the debt itself. After 5 years, we've got over $15 trillion in debt. It's the size of our total economy. We need to start paying it off. And we should only run deficits in an economic crisis like the Great Recession we entered in 2008-2009. I don't blame Obama for running deficits during that year of 2009 and maybe 2010. But the recession's over, and there's no more excuses. We need a balanced budget. These are the times that try men's souls. America is once again at a crossroads, as we've often been before. But when we come together and we roll up our sleeves and we do the work that needs to be done, when we're able to put aside our differences long enough to come up with solutions, we come out better on the other end. We sacrificed through the Great Depression and World War II, and we created the prosperity of the 1950s and early 60s, and we can do it again. Let's make America great for our children and grandchildren. Thank you for tuning in to Blue Dog Radio. This is the WAG signing off.
Now is the time for all good Americans to come to the aid of their country.